I still remember the sound. Not the gunshot. That one got swallowed by the roar of the crowd. What I remember is the chant of the fans rolling over the city like waves beating against a pier. Drums, fireworks, car horns. A whole town split in half by two colors in one game. That was the day we found blood on the bleachers. Or, to be precise, in a narrow alley behind the stadium. On the ground, under a broken light, with his team's shirt soaked in red. And I, already with gray in my hair, had to answer a simple question with a complicated truth. Was that a fight between fans, or a planned execution hiding behind the noise of football? It was a Saturday that felt like a holiday. From early morning, the city woke up in the colors of the classic. Half in blue and white, half in red and black. Bars opened before the sun had fully burned through the mist. Plastic chairs on the sidewalks, beer bottles sweating on the tables, radios shouting commentary from old speakers. You could smell fried snacks in the air, mixed with exhaust fumes and cheap cologne. Every corner had someone selling flags, scarves, counterfeit jerseys. Kids with painted faces held their fathers' hands, learning early that here, a football classic is not just a game. It is proof of identity. Our small station was fully mobilized. All available officers on duty. Patrol cars surrounding the stadium, extra teams at bars known for trouble. On paper, we were prepared. In reality, we were just hoping that old grudges would stay in the past where they belonged. Hope, in my line of work, is a fragile thing. The game was already in the second half when the call came. I was in a patrol car, circling the main avenue near the stadium. I could hear the distant roar when someone almost scored, fireworks exploding before the ball even hit the net. Then the radio crackled. A patrol officer, voice tense, reported a body behind the north stand of the stadium, in the service alley used for deliveries and, after dark, for other things people do when they are drunk and stupid. Male young, the officer said. Looks like gunshot. I felt that familiar heaviness in my chest. Game forgotten. Score forgotten. I turned the car and went there, sirens off, because sirens change the air, and I needed to see the scene as untouched as possible. The alley was narrow, with walls stained by moisture and old graffiti. Overflowing trash bins lined one side, the back wall of the stadium on the other. Above us, the noise from the stands was deafening, like a storm trapped inside a metal box. He was lying on his side, one arm stretched out, fingers curled as if reaching for something that was no longer there. He wore the blue and white shirt of Sarah Athletic Club, a little worn at the edges, number 10 on the back. The fabric was torn where the bullet had entered near the ribs. There was not much blood on the wall. Most of it was under him. That told me he fell quickly. No struggle. No chase. His face was young. Too young for that kind of stillness. A thin beard, a small scar on the eyebrow. A boy who had only been a man for a few years. His identification was in his pocket, his wallet beside it, money intact, game ticket stubs still fresh. Not robbery. That much was clear. The officers looked at me, waiting for a word. And in that moment, with the muffled roar of the stadium above us, I knew one thing. If we were not careful, his death would be filed away as fan violence, a statistic, a headline. I was not going to let that happen. His name was Rafael Menezes. He was 23 years old. Mechanic's helper at a small auto shop near the old bus station. He lived with his mother in a modest house in Villa Cruzeiro, a neighborhood where the streets are uneven and kids learn early to dodge both potholes and trouble. I went to his house that same night. I prefer to do that myself when I can. Delivering bad news is part of the job, but handing it to someone else has always felt like cowardice. His mother opened the door still wearing the blue and white jersey. The radio was on low, as if she were trying to balance routine and anxiety. She already knew. Mothers like her sense the storm before it hits. When I said his name, her legs wobbled. She held onto the door frame. I saw the life drain from her face, slowly, like someone turning down a light. She did not ask who. She did not ask why. Her first question was, did he suffer? I told her the truth as gently as I could. It seemed quick. One shot. He probably did not even fully understand what was happening. She nodded and cried quietly, like someone who had rehearsed that pain in her mind for years. Then she started telling me about him. How he loved football as a child. How he spent entire afternoons juggling a ball on the dusty street barefoot. He had dreamed of being a player once. A bad knee injury in adolescence ended that dream, but not the love for the game. He worked long hours at the shop, saved whatever he could, and took his mother to the stadium once a year, on Mother's Day, when he could afford the tickets. Now his biggest dream was simple: Fix up an old car with his boss, make it run again, maybe open a small garage of his own someday. Ordinary dreams, beautiful in their simplicity. She showed me his room. Small and tidy. Posters on the wall. A faded ball in the corner. A couple of jerseys folded carefully on the chair. A boy like thousands of others, passionate about a club that would never know his name. And now gone. In that moment, I promised myself something. I would not let anyone reduce him to one more violent fan. He was more than that. He had a life that existed beyond 90 minutes of rivalry. Back at the station, the first version arrived quickly, as it always does. A fight between fans. The classic had been tense. The teams were fighting for promotion to the National Second Division. Stadium packed. Rivalry boiling. Rumors began circulating before the final whistle. Voice messages, shaky videos, images of small brawls near the gates, insults shouted across the lines of police, beer bottles flying. Local news sites rushed out headlines. Fan shot near stadium. Exactly what I feared. But when something seems too simple, I have learned to slow down. I went back to the scene. Over and over. I walked the alley, measured distances, listened to the echo of my own steps on the cement. There were no signs of a mass fight. No scattered bottles. No broken benches. No multiple bloodstains. Only Rafael. One shell casing. A faint footprint near the trash bin, almost erased by later movement. That did not look like a chaotic fan brawl. It looked like a surgical act. The security cameras around the stadium told us more. From the main gate, we saw Rafael entering with friends. Smiling, singing, scarf around his neck. Nothing unusual. After the game, which Sarah Athletic lost at the end, his posture changed like everyone else's. Shoulders lowered, hands on his head, that stunned look of someone who just watched a dream slip away. Then, in the flow of people leaving, Rafael separated from the group. He walked alone toward the north side, not toward the bus stops, not toward the usual bars. It was as if someone had called him. In none of the recordings did I see a group chasing him, no aggressive confrontation, no mob wearing rival colors. That was when the second hypothesis took shape. This was not spontaneous fan violence. This had been arranged. Our city has a long memory, longer than most people admit. Behind club colors and chants and flags, there are stories older than football. Land disputes, bar fights that ended badly, unpaid debts, old feuds that pass from father to son like a cursed inheritance. I asked my team to dig into Rafael's history. At first, nothing serious came up. A note about a teenage street scuffle, a misunderstanding at a party, nothing that pointed to murder. Then one of my officers brought me a thin folder, the kind that looks harmless but carries poison inside. It was about a shooting many years earlier in Villa Cruzeiro. 1 dead, 1 wounded. The victim's last name was Duarte. In our city, the Menezes family and the Duarte family have a history. They lived on opposite ends of the same neighborhood. For generations, they had fought over a piece of land near the river, then over a market, later over a gambling debt involving a football match. The lines in the file were dry, but the story behind them was not. Years earlier, Rafael's older cousin had been accused of shooting a Duarte during a bar argument. Witnesses contradicted each other, evidence disappeared, people were intimidated into silence. The case died slowly in dusty folders. No one convicted. No one truly cleared. I remembered that investigation. I was younger then, less tired. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, I could fix everything. Life taught me otherwise. What I had not realized back then was that both families kept their scoreboards. Not just for football. For blood. And now Rafael, a Menezes, was dead on the night of a decisive classic. Maybe it was coincidence. My instinct told me it was not. I started with his friends. They were exhausted, eyes red from lack of sleep and from crying. They told the same story at first. They went to the game together, drank some beers near the stadium, sang, shouted at the referee. When the final whistle blew, they felt like the world had ended. Normal grief for passionate fans. Then the details started to shift. One friend mentioned a message on Rafael's phone before the game. He had looked serious but brushed it off, called it family stuff. Another remembered seeing a group of men near the north stand exit. They were not wearing club shirts, did not look like fans. They looked like people who had come to the stadium with another purpose. We had found Rafael's phone in his pocket, screen cracked but still working. In his messages, between jokes and game predictions, one conversation stood out. A number saved as Uncle Carlos. The exchange was tense and short. They talked about an old argument involving Rafael's father, who had died years earlier in a traffic accident. There was mention of a debt, a promise, things left unresolved. The last message, sent hours before the game, said, "Tonight, behind the stadium, north side, we talk like men. No crowd, no witnesses." It was not from Uncle Carlos. It came from another number that had suddenly entered the conversation, as if someone else had taken the phone. The signature at the end was simple: Duarte. While the city saw a football classic, the Menezes and the Duarte families saw an opportunity. Covered by noise, with all eyes on the pitch, someone decided to settle an old score. Now we had to find the faces behind the names. We went back to the cameras, not only at the stadium, but also on nearby streets and bars. Frame by frame, we built a map of movements. In one recording, we saw Rafael leaving his seat alone. In another, we saw him talking briefly with a man near the corridor. The man wore a cap pulled low, neutral clothes, nothing with club colors. He looked more like someone on his way to work than a fan. His posture was tense, eyes scanning. The posture of someone used to danger. We enlarged the image as much as we could. One of my younger officers, good with faces, snapped his fingers and said, "Chief, I think this is Paulo Duarte." The name hit the room like a stone in a pond. Paulo Duarte was the son of the Duarte who had died in that old Villa Cruzeiro case, the unsolved shooting that still weighed on my conscience. Since then, Paulo had moved through small crimes, illegal betting, threats, a few short arrests. Never long in prison. Smart enough to avoid holding anything too serious in his own hands. He was also known for another habit. He bet heavily on football games, especially on matches involving Serra Athletic and their rival railway club. A man with grudges and gambling problems, present at a game where the city's attention was elsewhere, and a young Menezes ended up dead in an alley. Sometimes the puzzle pieces fit almost too well. We picked up Paulo 2 days later in a small bar near the slaughterhouse, playing cards with men who suddenly pretended not to know him well. When I walked in, he gave me a look that mixed respect and resentment, the look of someone who has grown up walking on the edge of the law. "Chief," he said, as if I had just interrupted his night instead of his life. At the station, he sat across from me in the interrogation room. He did not ask for a lawyer, not at first, and that choice always tells a story. I put a photo of Rafael on the table, blue and white shirt, smile open, eyes bright. "Do you know him?" I asked. Paulo stared a second too long, then shrugged. "Looks like any other fan." I slid the next photo over, the camera frame showing Paulo and Rafael talking in the corridor. This time, he did not shrug so fast. "Everyone talks to everyone at a game," he said. "Maybe he asked for a cigarette." I kept silent and watched him. After a while, he rubbed his face with both hands. "Look, Chief," he said. "The boy came to talk. We knew each other from the neighborhood. Old Villa Cruzeiro stuff. We talked, that is all. When I pushed him about old stuff, he said it was history between families, nothing to do with the game, nothing to do with the shooting. Sometimes people tell you the truth by accident while trying to lie. He had just confirmed it. This was not about football. It was about blood. To prove premeditation, instincts are not enough. You need steps, a story built with facts, something a jury can follow. We pulled his phone records. Calls on game day, messages before and after. We found repeated contact with a number registered to a small betting house near the stadium, owned by a man known as Big Joao, who had ties to both families. The messages between Paulo and Joao talked about settling the account. At first, it could have meant money or revenge. Then one phrase made it clear. During the classic, no one will hear anything. On the day of the game, Paulo's phone moved near the stadium, then near the north alley, then went dark for almost an hour. Rafael's phone followed a similar path, from the stands to the corridor, from the corridor to the north side, then silence. 2 lines converging on the same point. Witnesses filled in the gaps. A street vendor remembered seeing Rafael walking with a man in a cap toward the back of the stadium. They were not shouting, not fighting, just walking fast with purpose. A teenager, who did not want his name recorded, said he heard something like a single firecracker in the alley. One pop. He thought it was nothing. People were setting off fireworks all night. One pop. One bullet. One body. The pieces were now too clear to ignore. This was not a random explosion of anger. It was a meeting. A trap. When we confronted Paulo with the phone records, the messages, and the images, his bravado started to crack. He asked for a lawyer, and the formal questioning paused. Hours passed. Outside, the city kept moving, cars and voices, people who had no idea that, in a small room with fluorescent lights, two families past and present were colliding. When his lawyer arrived, Paulo's posture had changed. He was still defiant, but his eyes were heavier, like a player who knows the match is lost but refuses to admit it. He admitted meeting Rafael that night, admitted they had agreed to talk, admitted old resentment. He claimed he wanted to put an end to it. According to him, Rafael came armed and tried to shoot first. He spoke of a struggle, of a gun going off by accident, of a tragic mistake. But there were no signs of a struggle in the alley, no bruises on him, no objects knocked to the ground. Forensics said the shot was at close range, from the side, slightly behind, an angle that did not match his story of a face-to-face fight. When I laid that out, he lowered his eyes. His lawyer whispered in his ear. Paulo clenched his jaw. "I did not want to kill the boy," he muttered. "He was not the one who pulled the trigger on my father. But he carried the name. The face. He walked the same way. Every time I saw him at the stadium, screaming like everything was fine, I remembered my old man on the stretcher. I asked him why that day, why the stadium. He looked tired. Because during a classic, he said, the whole city is blind and deaf. If I had done it on a normal day, everyone would remember the sound." He did not cry. Men like him rarely do. But something broke in his voice. He was not a monster. He was a man shaped by old wounds, by a culture that confuses honor with revenge and passion with possession. And still, he had made a choice. The gun did not walk there by itself. He carried it. He raised it. He fired it. We charged him with homicide, aggravated by premeditation. The owner of the betting house also faced charges for his role in arranging the meeting. Legally, the case was solid. On paper, justice. But emotionally, it felt like a small bandage on a wound that cut through generations. In the weeks that followed, life tried to return to normal. The clubs kept playing. Fans kept singing. People kept arguing in bars about lineups and referees. The stadium increased security. More searches, more officers, more fences. For many, Rafael became that boy who died at the Classic, a sad anecdote, a cautionary tale parents used to scare children into behaving. But I knew better. Rafael did not die because of football. He died because two families kept their hate alive. Football was just the stage, the perfect mask. Sometimes, when I drive past the stadium on a quiet afternoon, I slow down. I imagine the stands empty, only the echo of footsteps on concrete, a stray ball rolling, flags folded in dark closets. Without the crowd, the stadium looks small and harmless. The violence does not live in the concrete. It lives in us, in our addictions, in our pride, in our refusal to let go. They still call that match the bloody classic on sports shows. They talk about the canceled celebration, the extra police, the investigation into betting houses. They rarely say Rafael's name. But here, with my voice, I want to make it clear. He was not just a supporter, not just a victim. He was a young man who loved cars, who saved coins to buy tickets, who loved his club and trusted the wrong person on the wrong night. On the record, the case is closed. Killer identified. Motive established. Sentence handed down. But for me, it never ends so neatly. When the drums echo before a big game and the city turns into a boiling pot again, I always remember that alley behind the north stand. I remember a single shot hidden inside the roar of thousands. People say there was blood on the bleachers that night. I think the real stain was never on the concrete. It was on us, on this city, on the way we let old hatred walk freely, dressed in team colors and carried on chants. And that, more than any forensic report, is what still keeps me awake when the lights go out and the crowd's noise is only a ghost in my ears.